The public discourse on future conflict has been deliberately contaminated. While NewsNation reports on how artificial intelligence is reshaping war, the imagery is always kinetic. Swarms of autonomous drones, targeted explosions. This is a foundational error in threat perception. The missile barrage is a fiscal liability for the attacker and a known variable for the defender. The true asymmetric vector is not loud, it is silent. Its objective is not the liquidation of military assets, but the liquidation of economic solvency. The targets are the two pillars of Western financial dominance, the global satellite network and the subsea data cables. Analysts at RUSI and CSIS have modeled the deployment of low-cost, high-lethality autonomous platforms for these missions. The strategic goal is not to declare war, but to induce a systemic paralysis. You do not sink the carrier group, you blind its satellites. You do not bomb the stock exchange, you sever its connection to global liquidity. This protocol creates a new entity, the blind Leviathan. A nation-state possessing overwhelming kinetic power, but stripped of its sensory input, its market data, its global awareness. A superpower rendered deaf and blind, unable to transact or see, thrashing in the dark with a launch-on-warning posture. This is the calculated trigger for a systemic solvency crisis. The motive is not ideology, it is insolvency. A nation-state, when stripped of its patriotic veneer, operates like a balance sheet. A conventional war is the single largest liability a state can incur. The kinetic cost of deploying and losing main battle tanks, aircraft, and trained personnel is mathematically unsustainable for any power not backed by near-infinite liquidity. The initial phase of the Ukraine conflict was not a military miscalculation. It was a systemic solvency crisis. The expenditure of high-cost conventional assets against a determined defense yielded a negative return on investment. This fiscal hemorrhage created a domestic liability far more dangerous than any external threat. CSIS analysis confirms this vector, framing the conflict's unpopularity inside Russia not as a matter of morale, but as a direct threat to the regime's stability. When a state can no longer afford the symmetric fight and its population views the war as a drain on national solvency, the leadership is forced to pivot. Weakness mandates a change in strategy. This pivot is toward asymmetry. The objective shifts from territorial conquest to inflicting maximum economic pain on the adversary and its backers at the lowest possible cost. This is the blueprint. Proliferate low-cost, high-impact systems like the Pegasus Arms 25 drone, which can execute hundreds of sorties. The goal is to force your opponent into a state of fiscal exhaustion, an economic launch-on-warning posture where every defensive action bankrupts them. The central mechanism is not kinetic, it is economic. A systemic attack on a nation's solvency, executed through a new vector of low-cost lethality. Analysts at RUSI put the math in stark terms. A state-of-the-art main battle tank represents a $5 million asset. The FPV drone that achieves a mission kill on that tank costs $500. This is not a battle, it is an accounting problem. A 10,000 to 1 cost exchange ratio is a fiscally ruinous liability for the superior power. This inversion of power is known as the democratization of violence. The term is clinical. It signifies the collapse of the state's monopoly on high lethality force projection. The blueprint for this is no longer secret. How artificial intelligence is reshaping the future of war is now public discourse. Mass-produced, semi-autonomous platforms are the delivery system. Reports from the Ukraine conflict confirm a single Pegasus Arms 25 drone airframe conducted over 560 sorties. This isn't an anomaly. It is the new operational standard. The strategy is to force a systemic bleed. The asymmetric actor does not need to win on the battlefield. They only need to make the cost of defense unsustainable. Each intercept, each defensive deployment, each asset loss drains the treasury. This forces the target nation onto an escalation ladder where conventional responses become a vector for self-inflicted bankruptcy, making a solvency crisis a mathematical certainty. The geographic arenas for this new conflict are not the traditional battlefields. They are systemic gray zones, regions characterized by pliable governance and strategic location. CSIS documents refer to these as proxy laboratories. The objective is not territorial conquest. It is the beta testing of economic attrition models. While news outlets focus on regional instability, they miss the strategic function. These zones are staging grounds deliberately selected to refine the protocols of asymmetric financial warfare. Within these laboratories, low-cost, high-lethality autonomous systems are being field-tested. The proliferation of AI is not just reshaping war, as NewsNation reports. It is industrializing asymmetric leverage. Data from the Ukraine conflict confirms the mathematical certainty of this threat. The Pegasus Arms 25 drone, for example, saw a single airframe execute over 560 sorties. This is not a weapon. It is a reusable kinetic liability delivered at a near-zero marginal cost. The defender's economic model cannot sustain this. The primary attack vector is critical economic infrastructure. An assault on a single oil choke point, as analyzed by Bloomberg, is a test case. The goal is not just the physical asset destruction, but to measure the resulting fiscal hemorrhage. The insurance claims, the supply chain disruption, the emergency liquidity required from the central bank. It creates a systemic solvency crisis, identical in mechanism to how Fed officials describe a lack of supply triggering a housing crisis. One is shelter, the other is national energy. The principle is identical. Therefore, the instability you are shown is a calculated distraction. According to RUSI analysts, these gray zone operations are dress rehearsals. They are designed to perfect a blueprint for exporting a fiscal crisis directly into a G7 economy. The strategy is to force the superior power into a zero-sum choice. Either accept bankruptcy through a 1,000-cut conventional defense, or escalate to restore deterrence via an unthinkable kinetic event. The laboratory is proving the model works. The launch-on-warning protocol is not a policy debate. It is a legacy kill switch embedded in the command structure of every nuclear state. According to analysts at CSIS, the doctrine dictates that if a nation's early warning systems detect an incoming nuclear strike, it must launch a retaliatory strike before the incoming warheads arrive and destroy its own capacity to retaliate. The entire system is built on a single premise: trust the signal. But in the modern battle space, as artificial intelligence reshapes the future of war, the most effective weapon is not kinetic. It is the corruption of the signal itself. This is the fog of digital war. A sophisticated cyber attack does not announce itself. It targets the foundational layer, the sensors, the satellites, the radar. It doesn't show you a false missile launch. It shows you nothing at all. The commander is now blind. The protocol is binary. If the signal is lost, the system assumes the worst-case scenario. A decapitation strike is already underway. The absence of data becomes the data. Waiting for confirmation is a luxury that guarantees annihilation. Fear is no longer an emotion. It is a trigger condition. The mathematical certainty is this: the commander is forced to launch based on the absence of information. This isn't a malfunction. It is the systemic weaponization of ambiguity. Before an actor initiates a solvency crisis, they run a test, a calibration shot. The objective is not victory, but data. Analysts at CSCs document how artificial intelligence is reshaping warfare, but the primary vector is economic, not kinetic. The question being tested is simple. What is the fiscal to kinetic cost ratio of a modern superpower's defense protocol? Reports on platforms like the Pegasus Arms 25 strike drone confirm the blueprint. A single airframe can execute over 560 sorties. This is not a weapon. It is a reusable, low-cost liability vector you can point at a balance sheet. The calibration event will not be an explosion. It will be a systemic paralysis. Within the next 12 months, expect a coordinated, multi-point failure at a Tier 1 U.S. logistics or energy hub. The Port of Houston is a primary target, given the stakes for the global oil market. An autonomous swarm, utilizing commercially available AI, will execute a simultaneous shutdown of crane operations, power substations, and GPS navigation. The kinetic damage will be minimal, designed for plausible deniability, a cascading technical failure. The official report will attribute the blackout to an unknown cyber actor. This is a deliberate misdirection. The true signal, received by global adversaries, will be the multi-billion-dollar economic disruption and the fiscally ruinous cost of hardening every single port, data center, and substation against a threat that costs less than the annual budget for a single suburban high school. It is a mathematical proof of concept for economic siege warfare. The shot will be fired to see if the target flinches. It will.